Everyone in Boston knew Victoria Bennett's name. They knew her elegance, her success, and the way she could walk into any room and make everyone notice. But nobody knew the woman who went home to a quiet apartment and wondered if anyone truly saw her. I learned that before I ever understood what she meant to me. My name is Emma Collins, and when I first arrived in Boston, I thought I was only starting over. I was 34 years old, carrying a camera, a few unfinished dreams, and the hope that a new city could help me find the person I had lost along the way. I never expected that my biggest discovery would be the woman everyone else believed they already knew. Victoria Bennett was my best friend's oldest sister. That was the first thing I knew about her. Sarah Collins had talked about her for years. Victoria was the responsible one, the successful one, the woman who built a respected design company from nothing and became one of the most admired names in Boston. People described her as confident, impossible to impress, and always in control. But the first time I met her, I noticed something different. It was not her confidence that caught my attention. It was the quiet moment when she thought nobody was watching. I saw a woman standing alone after a crowded event, looking through the window at the city lights with an expression that felt familiar. It was the look of someone who had achieved everything except the one thing she secretly wanted: to feel understood. Sarah introduced us that evening at a charity event connected to Victoria's company. "Emma, this is my sister Victoria," she said with a smile. Victoria turned toward me, and for a second, the busy room seemed to become quieter. "I have heard a lot about you," she said. I smiled. "Hopefully only the good things." She laughed softly. It was a small moment, but it stayed with me. Because everyone had told me Victoria Bennett was intimidating. Nobody told me she had a gentle laugh. Over the next few weeks, I started seeing pieces of the person behind the reputation. I helped Sarah with a photography project for Victoria's latest interior design campaign. That meant spending more time around her than I expected. First, I thought we were completely different. Victoria lived in a world of luxury offices, important meetings, and carefully planned decisions. I lived with creative uncertainty, changing schedules, and a camera that captured moments instead of controlling them. But somehow, those differences made our conversations interesting. She asked questions most people never asked. She wanted to know what inspired my photography, why I noticed small details, and what I wanted my future to look like. I realized something surprising. The woman everyone wanted to know was searching for someone who would simply listen. And maybe the biggest surprise was that I wanted to be that person. Still, there was a boundary I could not ignore. She was Victoria Bennett, my best friend's oldest sister. A woman I was never supposed to look at differently. But as the days passed, one question stayed in my mind. What happens when the person you should never fall for becomes the person who finally makes you feel seen? After that first meeting with Victoria, I tried to convince myself that she was simply an interesting person I had met through my best friend. Nothing more. She was Sarah's older sister. She was someone I respected. Someone whose life was completely different from mine. That should have been enough to keep my thoughts simple. But the more time I spent around her, the more I realized that the woman behind the reputation was far more fascinating than the image everyone talked about. A few days later, Sarah asked if I could help Victoria with the photography for her new design project. The company was creating a collection inspired by historic Boston homes, and Victoria wanted images that showed more than beautiful rooms. She wanted the photographs to capture memories, emotions, and the feeling of a place being truly lived in. I understood that immediately because that was how I saw the world through my camera. So I agreed. That was how Victoria and I started spending more time together. At first, our conversations were about work, colors, lighting, design ideas. But slowly they became something else. We talked about our favorite places in Boston, the books we loved, the small moments that made ordinary days special. I learned that Victoria was not as untouchable as people believed. She enjoyed quiet mornings with coffee near the window. She loved old buildings because they reminded her that everything could have a story. She smiled when she talked about the first apartment she designed after starting her company. It was the first time I saw pride in her expression without the pressure of proving herself. One afternoon, we were reviewing photographs in her office when she asked me a question that surprised me. "Emma, why do you photograph people when they are not looking?" I thought about it for a moment. Because people are usually more honest when they forget they are being seen. Victoria became quiet after that. I wondered if my answer had touched something personal. Maybe that is why your pictures feel different, she said. You notice things other people miss. I looked away because I did not know how to respond. Nobody had described me that way before. Over the years, I had started believing my creative work was just a dream I was chasing without direction. But Victoria saw value in something I had almost stopped believing in. That was the first moment I understood why people were drawn to her. It was not because of her success. It was because when she cared about someone, she made them feel important. The more I learned about her, the more I noticed the contrast between her public image and her private world. Everyone thought Victoria had everything: the career, the reputation, the beautiful home overlooking Boston. But I started noticing the moments when the confidence faded. The moments when she became quiet after receiving invitations she did not want to attend. The moments when she looked at old family photos and seemed lost in memories. One evening after we finished working, we walked outside her office into the cool Boston air. The city lights reflected on the streets, and for a moment, neither of us felt the need to rush away. Do you ever feel like people know a version of you that is not really you? Victoria asked. Her question stayed between us. I looked at her and realized something. The woman everyone admired was not looking for attention. She was looking for someone who could see beyond the surface. And somehow, without trying, I was becoming that person. The more time I spent with Victoria, the harder it became to believe the stories people told about her. Everyone had their own version of Victoria Bennett. Some saw a successful businesswoman who built an impressive career in Boston. Others saw a woman who always looked confident, always knew what to say, and always seemed impossible to reach. But I was beginning to see something different. I was seeing the person behind the carefully created image. And that person was someone who carried more emotions than she ever allowed anyone to notice. Our project continued, and with every meeting the distance between us became smaller. We still talked about photography and design, but our conversations slowly moved into places that felt more personal. One afternoon, we visited an old historic home in Boston that Victoria was redesigning. The building was quiet, filled with natural light and memories from another time. While I photographed the details, Victoria stood near the window looking outside at the neighborhood. I love places like this, she said. They remind me that something does not have to be perfect to be beautiful. I looked at her and realized she was not only talking about the house. Do you believe that about people too? I asked. She smiled slightly. I am trying to. That answer stayed with me, because for the first time I saw how much pressure Victoria carried. She had spent years becoming someone everyone admired. Maybe she had forgotten that she was allowed to simply be herself. Later that day, we sat in a small cafe near the design studio. It was not planned. We were just two people taking a quiet break before returning to our responsibilities. Victoria asked me about my life before Boston. I told her about leaving my old city after feeling stuck. I told her how I had spent years wondering if my photography was a real career, or just a dream I was afraid to release. You know what I notice about you? Victoria asked. You are always searching for the story behind everything. Laughed softly. Maybe because I am still trying to understand my own. She looked at me with a thoughtful expression. I think we all do that. That moment felt different. It was not about attraction. It was about recognition. Two people who had spent years trying to understand themselves suddenly finding comfort in someone who understood the same questions. But I also knew there was something complicated about getting closer to Victoria. Sarah trusted me. Victoria was her sister. No matter how natural our conversations felt, there was a line I had to respect. I reminded myself of that whenever I noticed how easily Victoria made me smile. Whenever I found myself looking forward to our meetings. Whenever I wondered what it would be like to know the woman behind the quiet moments even more. Then one evening, something unexpected happened. After a company event, Victoria stayed behind while everyone else left. I found her sitting alone in the empty office, looking at old photographs from years before. Are those yours? I asked. She nodded. My family. Before everything became complicated. I sat beside her, listening as she shared memories she rarely talked about. She told me about dreams she once had, choices she made, and moments when she realized she had become more focused on being successful than being happy. Before I left, she looked at me and said, "Thank you for not treating me like everyone else does." Walking home that night through the Boston streets, I realized something that made me nervous. I was not just interested in Victoria Bennett's story anymore. I was starting to care about the woman living inside it. The hardest part about getting close to Victoria was not the distance between us. It was the invisible line I kept reminding myself not to cross. Every time we worked together, I discovered another side of her that nobody else seemed to know. She was not just the woman who appeared in magazines or the person people admired at Boston events. She was someone who laughed at simple jokes, someone who remembered small details about people, and someone who carried old wounds behind a calm expression. But the more I saw the real Victoria, the more I understood why everyone else only saw the surface. She had spent years making sure nobody looked deeper. A few weeks passed, and our design project became more successful than we expected. My photographs were featured in local publications, and Victoria received positive attention for the renovation work. Sarah was proud of both of us. She told me she had never seen Victoria this excited about a project in years. I smiled because I knew the reason was not just the work. It was the feeling of creating something meaningful with someone who understood her. One evening after a long day at the studio, Victoria and I stayed behind to organize the final details. The building was quiet, and the city outside the windows was glowing with evening lights. We sat with coffee in our hands talking about everything except work. She asked me about my family, my childhood, and the moments that shaped who I became. Then she asked a question I did not expect. "Emma, do you ever feel like people only know the version of you that you show them?" I looked at her and understood exactly what she meant. "Sometimes," I answered. "I think everyone has a part of themselves they are afraid to share." Victoria looked down at her coffee. "I used to think being strong meant never needing anyone." Her voice became softer. "Now I wonder if I was just afraid of being disappointed." That was the first time I heard the sadness beneath her confidence. I wanted to tell her she did not have to carry everything alone. But I stopped myself. Because caring about Victoria was becoming complicated. She was Sarah's sister. She was someone important to my closest friend. And I knew that some feelings could create consequences before you were ready to face them. The next day, Sarah invited me to dinner at her family home. I was excited because I had become close with her family, but I also felt nervous about seeing Victoria outside of work. During dinner, I noticed something I had never paid attention to before. Victoria was different around her family. She was still kind and composed, but there was a softness there. A younger version of herself appeared in small moments. Sarah teased her about being too serious, and Victoria laughed in a way I had rarely seen. After dinner, I helped clean the kitchen while Victoria stood nearby. For a moment, we were alone. "Thank you for making Sarah happy," she said. I smiled. "She makes me happy too." Victoria looked at me for a second longer than usual. "I think she was right about you." "About what?" I asked. She smiled gently. "That you notice things other people miss." I felt my heart react before my mind could stop it, and that scared me, because I realized something I had been avoiding. I was no longer just curious about Victoria Bennett. I was beginning to care about her in a way that felt impossible to ignore. The more I tried to ignore what was happening between Victoria and me, the harder it became to pretend everything was normal. I kept telling myself that admiration was not the same as love, that spending time together for a project did not mean anything more, that she was simply someone I respected, and someone who had inspired me to believe in my own creativity again. But every time we talked, every time she shared a part of herself that she rarely showed anyone, I felt the connection growing stronger. The most surprising part was that Victoria seemed to feel it too. She started opening up in small ways. She would send me pictures of old buildings she thought I would appreciate. She would ask for my opinion about design choices, not because she needed my professional advice, but because she genuinely wanted to know how I saw the world. For someone who had spent years surrounded by people trying to impress her, it felt meaningful that she cared about my simple perspective. One Saturday morning, Victoria invited me to join her at a local art exhibition in Boston. She said she needed a second opinion on a photography collection connected to one of her upcoming projects. I knew it was not a big invitation. I knew it was something friends could do. But I still felt nervous walking beside her through the gallery. The room was filled with paintings, photographs, and conversations from people who loved creativity. Victoria looked completely different there. She was not the powerful businesswoman everyone recognized. She was simply a woman who loved beautiful things. We stopped in front of a photograph showing an empty chair near a window. "What do you think?" she asked. I looked at the image carefully. "I think it feels like someone is waiting for a person who may never come." Victoria became quiet. "That is exactly what I felt when I saw it." Her answer surprised me. I turned toward her and for a moment, I saw the loneliness she usually kept hidden. Later that afternoon we walked through Boston Common. The weather was cool, and the city felt peaceful. Victoria told me about the years after her divorce. She admitted that she had focused so much on rebuilding her career that she forgot how to build a life outside of work. "People think being independent means you do not need anyone," she said. "But sometimes independence can become a way to hide." I understood that feeling. I had spent years questioning whether my dreams were realistic. We were different in many ways, but we shared the same fear. The fear of starting over. Then came the moment that changed everything. Sarah called me that evening. She sounded happy, but there was curiosity in her voice. "Emma, can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course." She paused. "Have you noticed that Victoria seems different lately?" My heart immediately became quiet. I did not know what to say. "Different how?" I asked. Sarah laughed softly. "Happier. More relaxed. More like herself." I looked out at the Boston skyline from my apartment window and thought about Victoria's smile that afternoon. I wanted to believe I was just imagining things. I wanted to believe my feelings were harmless. But deep down I knew something had changed. And the hardest part was realizing that the person I was falling for was the one person I had promised myself I would never see that way. I thought creating distance would make everything easier. After Sarah's question, I became more aware of every feeling I had been trying to ignore. I started noticing the small things that revealed how much Victoria had become part of my daily thoughts. A song she mentioned would remind me of one of our conversations. A beautiful building in Boston would make me wonder what she would see in it. Even my photography began changing, because I was paying more attention to the emotions behind every image. But I also knew I needed to be careful. Victoria was not just anyone. She was Sarah's older sister. She was someone my best friend trusted. And I did not want my feelings to create a situation where someone I cared about felt hurt or betrayed. So I tried to focus on work. I accepted more photography projects. I spent more time editing pictures and less time finding reasons to visit Victoria's office. I thought maybe if I stepped back, the feelings would become smaller. Instead, I realized how much I missed the conversations we shared. Then, unexpectedly, Victoria reached out. She asked if I could help her prepare photographs for a major presentation in her company. I almost said no. I almost created another excuse. But something inside me knew that avoiding her would not solve anything. It would only leave questions unanswered. We spent the entire afternoon working together in her office. First, everything felt professional. We discussed the project, reviewed images, and focused on details. But as the sun began setting over Boston, the conversation changed. Victoria looked through the photographs and smiled. "You know what I like about your work?" she asked. "You never try to make things look perfect." I looked at her. Maybe because perfect is not always real. She nodded slowly. "I think I spent a long time trying to create a perfect life." Her words carried a sadness I had heard before. "And did it work?" I asked gently. Victoria looked toward the window. "I achieved many things. But I do not think I allowed myself to feel happy." That honesty stayed with me. It was the first time Victoria admitted that the image everyone admired was not always the reality she lived. She told me about the years she spent building her company after her divorce. She explained that success became easier to manage than emotions. Work had rules. Feelings did not. "Sometimes I think people love what I represent more than who I actually am," she said. I wanted to tell her that was not true. I wanted to tell her that I saw her. But I knew. Those words carried more meaning than I was ready to admit. Before I left, Victoria stopped me near the door. "Emma, I hope you know that meeting you has changed something for me." I smiled carefully. "I am glad I could help with the project." She looked at me as if she wanted to say more, but she simply nodded. That night I realized the hardest part was no longer admitting that I cared about Victoria. The hardest part was accepting that she might care about me too. And that possibility changed everything. Because feelings were one thing, but choosing what to do with them was something much bigger. For the next few days, I tried to convince myself that everything between Victoria and me could return to normal. I told myself that one meaningful conversation did not have to change the way I saw her. I told myself that I was only grateful for the way she encouraged me, the way she believed in my photography, and the way she made me feel understood. But emotions are not always something we can organize like a project plan. They do not follow rules. They do not disappear just because we are afraid of what they might change. The truth was simple. I had started looking for Victoria in every room I entered. I had started wondering how her day was going. I had started caring about the moments when her confident smile disappeared. And I knew I could not keep pretending forever. Then something happened that made everything more complicated. Sarah invited me to a small family gathering at her parents' home outside Boston. It was supposed to be a simple evening with dinner and conversation. I almost declined because I knew Victoria would be there. But Sarah was my friend, and I did not want my feelings to create distance between us. When I arrived, Victoria greeted me with the same warm smile that always made me forget my worries for a moment. But there was something different in her expression. Something softer. Throughout the evening, I watched Victoria with her family. I saw how much responsibility she carried. She was the person everyone turned to for advice. The person who remembered every important detail. The person who always made sure everyone else was comfortable. But I also noticed something else. Nobody asked if she was okay. After dinner, I found Victoria outside on the back porch, looking at the quiet neighborhood. The evening air was cool, and the sounds of the city felt far away. "You always seem like you have everything figured out," I said. She smiled gently. "That is because I have had a lot of practice pretending." Her honesty surprised me. Victoria told me that after her divorce, she became afraid of needing anyone. She built a life where she could handle everything alone. But over time, she realized independence had become a wall between her and the possibility of being truly known. "I think I forgot what it feels like to let someone care about me," she said. I looked at her and felt the weight of those words. Because I understood. I knew what it was like to hide behind a version of yourself that felt safer. Before I could respond, Sarah stepped outside and called my name. The moment ended, but something had changed. Later that night, Sarah drove me home. She was quiet for a while before finally speaking. "Emma, can I ask you something?" I looked at her. "Sure." She hesitated. "Do you care about Victoria?" My heart stopped for a second. I searched for the right answer, but every answer felt complicated. "She means a lot to me," I finally said. Sarah looked ahead at the road. "I thought so." I felt nervous. But then she continued. "I have never seen her this happy in years." Her words stayed with me after I arrived home. Because I expected fear. I expected judgment. But instead I realized the biggest obstacle was not Sarah. It was not Victoria's past. It was not the opinions of other people. The biggest obstacle was whether Victoria and I were brave enough to admit what was already becoming impossible to ignore. After Sarah's words, I spent the entire night thinking about everything that had happened between Victoria and me. I expected the world to feel different after admitting my feelings, but instead everything looked the same. The Boston streets were still busy. The lights outside my apartment window still reflected on the buildings. My camera was still sitting on the table where I had left. But inside me something had shifted. I could no longer pretend that Victoria was just someone I admired. She had become someone who mattered to me in a way I never expected. The next morning, I received a message from Victoria asking if we could meet. My heart immediately became nervous. I wondered if she had noticed the changes between us. I wondered if she wanted to talk about what I was afraid to say. We met at a small coffee shop near the Charles River, a place we had visited once before after a long workday. Victoria looked calm, but I could tell she was thinking carefully about her words. "Emma," she said, "I have been trying to understand something." I waited quietly. "Meeting you reminded me of a part of myself I thought I had lost." Her honesty made me forget every prepared response I had imagined. She told me that for years she focused on being responsible, on being successful, on being the person everyone needed, but she never stopped to ask what she needed. I was afraid that if I opened my heart again, I would lose the life I worked so hard to build, she said. I looked at her and realized that Victoria was not afraid of feelings. She was afraid of change. And maybe I was too. We talked for hours that day. Not about what other people would think. Not about the complications. Just about us. About the moments when we both felt seen. About the quiet conversations that became the best parts of our days. But even with that honesty, there was still something standing between us. Sarah. Our friendship. The possibility of changing a relationship that meant so much to both of us. I never want you to feel like you have to choose between me and your friendship, Victoria said. That sentence showed me exactly who she was. Even in a moment where she could have focused only on her own feelings, she was still thinking about protecting the people she loved. A few days later, I met Sarah for coffee. I was prepared for a difficult conversation. Instead, she surprised me. Emma, I have known my sister my whole life, she said. She has always taken care of everyone else. I have been waiting for her to find someone who makes her remember that she deserves happiness too. I felt a wave of relief but also sadness, because I realized how much Victoria had hidden from the world. Sarah smiled and added, "The only thing I care about is that you both are honest." Those words gave me courage. Later that week, Victoria and I walked through Boston after sunset. The city felt peaceful around us. We stopped near a quiet street filled with old brick buildings and warm lights. I spent years believing my story was already written, Victoria said. Then you came along and made me wonder if there were pages I had never opened. I smiled because I understood exactly what she meant. Sometimes life does not change because we find something new. Sometimes it changes because we finally allow ourselves to see what was there all along. When I look back at the beginning of this journey, I still find it hard to believe how much changed in such a short time. I came to Boston thinking I was only searching for a new direction in my photography. I thought I was rebuilding my career, finding new opportunities, and creating a life that finally felt like mine. I never expected to meet someone who would completely change the way I saw love, trust, and even myself. Victoria Bennett was once the woman everyone thought they knew. The successful woman. The admired woman. The person who seemed to have every answer. But I discovered that behind all of that was someone who simply wanted to be understood. And somehow, she became the person who understood me too. The months that followed were not always simple. We took our time. We learned how to communicate honestly. We learned that a meaningful connection was not built from perfect moments, but from the small moments when two people chose to stay present with each other. Victoria continued leading her company, but she no longer carried every responsibility alone. She allowed people to support her. She allowed herself to laugh more. She allowed herself to dream about a future that was not based only on expectations. My photography also changed. I stopped searching for perfect images and started capturing real emotions. Victoria often told me that my greatest gift was seeing what other people overlooked. I think she gave me that gift in return. She taught me to see myself with more kindness. 1 year later, we returned to the historic Boston neighborhood where we first worked together. The streets looked the same, but we were different people. We stood near the old buildings, remembering the first conversations that brought us closer. Do you ever think about how different everything could have been? I asked. Victoria smiled. All the time. But I think we found each other exactly when we needed to. Those words stayed with me. Because sometimes life does not bring us what we expect. Sometimes it brings us what helps us become who we were always meant to be. I used to believe that love was something that arrived when everything was already perfect. Victoria showed me that love often arrives when we are still healing, still learning, and still becoming. She was not the woman who completed my life. I was not the person who saved hers. We were simply two women who found the courage to be honest about what we felt and brave enough to choose happiness. Looking at Victoria now, I no longer see the woman everyone in Boston admired. I see the woman who taught me that being truly known is one of the greatest gifts we can receive. Thank you for spending this time with our story. If this journey touched your heart, remember to support stories that celebrate love, hope, and second chances. Share it with someone who believes that new beginnings can happen at any stage of life. And never forget this quiet truth. Sometimes the person who helps us find love is the person who first helps us find ourselves.